Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, the bank that puts you first. They can meet your banking and financing needs for personal, agricultural, business, commercial, mortgages, and so much more. Visit firstbank.com to learn more.
In the spring of 1984, Virginia Tech Athletics launched a weekly subscription newspaper dedicated to covering Hokie sports. Dubbed the Hokie Huddler, the newspaper was the brainchild of head football coach and athletic director Bill Dooley, who felt that Virginia Tech needed an in-house Hokie-focused publication to provide an alternative to what Dooley and Virginia Tech fans rightly felt was an anti-VT bias from the only major newspaper within 100 miles of Blacksburg, the Roanoke Times. The Roanoke Times sports editor at the time was Duke graduate and ACC homer Bill Brill, who made no secret of his disdain for Hokie sports and Virginia Tech in general. It poisoned the coverage and commentary of the Hokies by the newspaper. Into this environment came the Hokie Huddler, which printed its first issue in the spring of 1984 and ran for almost 25 years until mid-2008. The Huddler was a mostly black and white publication with color covers that you could subscribe to by mail. It was usually 16 to 20 pages in length and was printed 33 times a year. And for long-suffering Virginia Tech fans who received negative coverage from the Roanoke Times and little to no coverage from anywhere else, it was a godsend. The Huddler underwent many format changes over the years, including an awkward renaming to HokieSports.com, the newspaper, in 2000. The .com was dropped 2 years later, and the newspaper ran by the still awkward title of Hokie Sports, the newspaper, until printing its last issue in July of 2008. The Hokie Huddler only had 3 editors in its lifespan. Doug Waters launched it and oversaw it for 1 year, and then Chris Colston took over and grew the Huddler through the 1995-1996 school year. Jimmy Robertson became its final editor and shepherded the Huddler into the internet age and through its last issue. Recently, we hosted Doug Waters and Chris Colston in studio, and they shared stories of how the Huddler got started, the challenges in running it, and anecdotes about the people and players they encountered in the first dozen years of the Huddler's existence. Welcome into this episode of the Tech Sideline Podcast, which features Doug Waters, who ran the Hokie Huddler in its first year of 1984-85, and Chris Colston, who took over editorial duties until 95-96. Gentlemen, welcome into the show. I'm Tech Sideline founder Will Stewart. This episode of the Tech Sideline Podcast comes to you from the Tech Solutions Studio, as always, and it's also sponsored by Richmond realtor Christine Shepard and also from Richmond, Rich Webb, driving enterprise IT. Rich Webb has hosted Tech Sideline for over 20 years. Guys, I have a feeling this is almost going to feel like a 2-part episode because, Doug, we're going to talk to you about the early days of the Hokie Huddler, why it got started, and the difficulty in getting it launched and the fun in getting it launched. And Chris, and then we'll talk to you and talk about the next 11 years, which was a tremendous time in Virginia Tech athletics. So before we get into discussions about the Hokie Huddler, which I'm really looking forward to, let's establish both of you with the audience. Doug, let's start with you. You guys are both Tech grads. When did you go to Tech? What did you major in, et cetera?
Went to Tech from 76 to 80. I was a communications major surrounded by engineering majors and accounting majors and architecture. I thought those guys worked way too hard, but so I was in the journalism program, worked on the CT as a reporter, a sports writer, then became sports editor my junior year, and then editor-in-chief my senior year. So that took up a lot of time. Graduated in 1980, kind of, sort of, because I had to finish up summer school after the graduation there just to get myself finished up on all my hours. But started working for the Roanoke Times while I was still finishing up college. I was really caught a break becoming a reporter at a paper of that quality right out of school. But there were a couple of things that brought me some notoriety, which we're going to talk about.
We'll get into,
yes. And I think I got noticed a little bit that way. And also I was already here and I didn't have to pay relocation costs. So that worked in my favor too. But at any rate, worked for the Roanoke Times for a couple of years, worked as a city editor at the Winchester Star, and then got the call from Bill Dooley to please come start the newspaper here. And we're going to talk about all of that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's the brief buildup.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah. So, same year, graduated Virginia Tech, 1980, marketing major, no journalism experience whatsoever, okay. Zero. And then out of school, just knocked around on a lot of jobs, couldn't really find myself. And I was actually at the Newcastle Record Circulation 300 when I met with Doug. And then that led to the Hokie Huddler. Did that, went from 300 circulation to 3,000. Then I got a job with Baseball Weekly, circulation 300,000. Then moved up covering pro football and NBA for USA Today, circulation 3 million.
Wow.
So kept adding zeros. And now I'm a teacher at Loudoun County High School, teach English. Love it.
All right.
And write novels.
So, and we'll give you a chance to plug that later.
Yeah, why not?
Doug, what are you doing these days?
Now I'm retired. I stuck with journalism for 8 years, decided that was an awful lot of work for a little bit of money. There's money to be made, but it's at the upper crust of the business. Yeah. Switched over to the insurance industry, did a little bit of everything, ended up on the executive side, and I ended my career as a national marketing guy, national sales guy, really, for a West Coast company. But they let me stay in my home in Westchester, Ohio. We've lived in the Cincinnati area now for, 35 years, I think it is.
Wow.
Suffering Reds fans, suffering Hokie fans. We have a lot in common, so yeah.
All right. So guys, let's set the table here. In the internet age, we're now used to athletic departments pumping out all of their own content and really getting their message out to the fans. But back in the day, and we're talking the mid 1980s is when the Hokie Huddler got launched. Mm-hmm. Athletic departments were kind of dependent on local media, and if you were one of the big programs, national media, to provide your coverage for you. There was a problem at Virginia Tech with that, and the problem was that the sports editor at the Roanoke Times was overtly hostile, I thought, to Virginia Tech.
Yes.
Bill Brill, famous name in Hokie lore infamous, I guess I should say, in Hokie lore. So, Doug, you are very familiar with the Brill thing. What I know about Brill, I read a little bit last night. He was a graduate of Duke, loved the ACC, and I think it's fair to say he hated Virginia Tech. And he was the sports editor of the Roanoke Times, the only large newspaper within, a couple hours. And so that's a problem because the coverage of Virginia Tech was not favorable by any stretch of the imagination. Now, you have a history with Mr. Brill, so tell that story because it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I'll recap that. There's been an article that, of course, was published, and some of you may have.
And we will link that in the description of the
Wonderful.
YouTube video. It's about 10 years ago.
All right. Well, I'll try not to repeat everything from that. But I grew up in Roanoke, had read Brill, was familiar with his distaste for Virginia Tech already. But then when I became the sports editor of the CT, hobnobbing with coaches and administrators over here in the athletic department, the Brill stories just wouldn't stop, and I was a junior at that time, not terribly responsible, I think you could say. And so I decided I'm going to write a column and I'm just going to lambast the guy. And out came this column entitled, "Bill Brill, You Make Me Ill." Big hit. Everybody loved it. My journalism professor pulled me aside and just gave me a tongue lashing because it was awful as far as any kind of journalistic standard. I was just repeating stories without verifying them, hearsay, third-hand information, all these wild accusations, most of which were probably true, I thought. So I did it. Then a week later, I was home in Roanoke, and here at my house was a letter waiting for me from Bill Brill. I couldn't believe he'd written to me at my home address, and he had a great opening line. He said, "Dear Doug, I hope you've recovered from your illness." I was kind of jealous of that. And I realized, and my professor had warned me, you've probably torpedoed your career. This may follow you the rest of your career, what you've done here, I thought that was a bit harsh, but so I wrote him a little note back, tried to get to a place of peace, and I thought, okay, well, that's it. Another week or so passed. One day I opened up the Roanoke Times. Here's the cover of the paper, the cover of the sports section. It's all about me. These were letters to the editor from places like Abingdon and Richmond and Roanoke, criticizing my column in the Collegiate Times. And I'm like, how did they ever even see the Collegiate Times? And I have to believe that Brill went around and got some of his cronies to write these letters, I guess. And so I was just stunned. Well, now some time passes. I get a job at the Roanoke Times as a news reporter. Pretty soon, working in the bureau here in the New River Valley, two of us were asked to come down and participate in a weekly meeting that they held to critique the newspaper. So as we're driving down I-81, my buddy and I said, "Hey, I got the sports section." And he looked at me and he said, "You know, your career could be on the line here, right?" And I said, "I'm going to light him up." And so we got in there. I put the sports section on a little tab and tacked it up. And I started out by saying, "Now this is what I call a disappointing sports page." And I started to criticize. And the first 2 games that year, the first one was against Wake Forest, I think. Not a single action photo, just a picture of the mascot. Next game was a home game against East Tennessee or someone like that. Not a single action shot. One picture of the East Tennessee State quarterback lying flat on his back. And I said, people don't read the paper to find out the score. They read the paper to relive it and to try to figure out why we won and to celebrate it or why we lost and to look at the action photos. And I said, since you obviously can't get any action photos, I'm pretty handy with a camera. I'll take pictures, and the photo editor leaped out of his chair practically. "There's plenty of action shots. He just won't print them." Meanwhile, Brill is sitting there, not looking at me the whole time, but just getting redder and more furious. And finally, I went through a few more examples of his bias. I talked about how he was hurting us in this market. It's supposed to be a growth market. I'm covering a murder trial, and I get the question, why does Bill Brill hate Virginia Tech? Covering a city council meeting. Why does Bill Brill hate? It was really hurting us. Yeah. So finally, the Frosty Landon, the managing editor, is that a great name for a managing editor or what? Frosty Landon. So Brill, what do you think? And he was so outraged. He'd gone from red to purple to slightly overtoned black in his face, and just he couldn't even form words. He was in such a rage, and he never did really say much. It's like and that was about all he could say. And then I found out later when he left the meeting, he went out, kicked a chair across the sports department, and that was the last we ever interacted right there. So we still ended up on trips together. We never looked at each other. We never talked to each other. But that was my Bill Brill legacy. And by the way, just to fill in a gap for some people that we were talking about earlier, I feel like I have 2 lasting legacies from the collegiate times. One is my Bill Brill column. The other was when, as a senior, and I was editor of the paper, the Board of Visitors was considering renaming to Virginia Tech as the official name.
From Virginia
Polytechnic Institute and State University. Right. And I thought, well, they never asked the students what we think. We should have a contest. So we ran a contest called Name That University, and out popped the winning entry, which I still have the official T-shirt from here. Eastern Institute of Enlightenment and Intellectual Outgrowth, or EIEIO, which is still a thing today, I think. So anyway, those are my 2 contributions, Bill Brill and EIEIO, that I could still say have some meaning 40 plus years later.
So a related story to that EIEIO, my brother graduated Virginia Tech in 1982. And of course, each year the class ring has a unique design to it. And I believe there's a torch on every class ring. And when he graduated in 82, you have to get a magnifying glass to see it. But the flames in the torch spell out EIEIO, which is, paying homage to the contest in the newspaper. So let's fast forward a little bit. You said you went from there to, you were the city
editor at the Winchester Star. Mm-hmm. I spent about 2 years at the Roanoke Times, got this editing opportunity, a smaller paper, but I thought that was a good opportunity.
So then you get a call.
So then I get a call out of the blue from Bill Dooley.
Now, did you know Bill Dooley from your days at the CT?
Yes. In fact, Dooley was hired in 78.
Mm-hmm. 78.
Yeah. Spring of 78, right when I was promoted to be the sports editor.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So from the day he set foot on campus, I was his guy at the CT. And I got to tell you, to Dooley's credit, he was very committed to letting the paper tag along on all the trips, have a seat on the charter plane, all that kind of thing.
No kidding.
Got to know him very well. I criticized him a few times. Dooley's, one of his first moves was to take the gobbler call out of the equation. It used to be a touchdown would score and the gobble would go. It was great.
Oh yeah. So to clarify, the old scoreboard in the south end zone before there were stands there, it had a gobbler at the top, and when Virginia Tech scored a touchdown, you would hear the gobble.
The eye would flash and lights would go up around its profile.
Yes.
And it had the beanie, the VPI beanie.
Oh my gosh.
It was amazing.
And
but Dooley was also the guy who changed the Virginia Tech athletic teams officially from the Gobblers to the Hokies, correct?
Oh, now that I'm not sure about.
I'm pretty sure about that.
Okay.
I think because, we should also fill this in. Dooley wasn't just football coach. He was athletic director.
Correct.
So he was Lord and God of all.
Yes.
And I think he found the whole turkey thing probably a little embarrassing.
He didn't like it. He was not into the campy side, which I love. And I think most Virginia Tech people, I mean, for lack of a better word, the Hokie part of being a Hokie, Yeah. And he didn't like that. So I wrote a blistering column about that. I think it was titled Gobbler Come Home or something like that. And we had a big to-do when I was the editor of the paper. We were on to some investigation involving some players, and it got ugly. And I remember sitting with him and Jack Williams on a Sunday morning. He's unshaven, no socks, just got out of bed, because we were about to go to press. And we had this real heartfelt nose-to-nose conversation. So, it's not that he looked at me as somebody, I think, that was a kiss-up or something like that. However, I do think the presence of that Bill Brill history played some kind of role because it convinced him that I was a tried and true fan of Virginia Tech. And that's what he wanted when thinking about this newspaper. So, yeah, the call came middle of July in 1983. And Doug, this is Coach Dooley. I was like, it is?
Why?
And he laid this out to me. He wanted to start a paper. And this thrill went through me, It's like, yeah, of course I'm interested. And then he started talking a little more. And he said, we want this published in August. You mean this August? And we had like 4 weeks. I said, well, Coach, I can't just walk out the door. I got to give them a couple weeks notice. It'll be August, And he was just determined. And he was a big believer in trying to combat the media stranglehold that you were talking about, and he wanted a voice, and he wanted it to be objective to a degree. And but we didn't have anything set up. There was no printing contract. There was no design. There was no name. There was no
ad
nothing.
Sales.
Nothing. And I thought, this is just a recipe for failure, So I said, look, it breaks my heart to say this, but I'm going to say no. And okay. And that was it. And then in January, he called me back.
So we're January of 84.
Now we're January of 84. The managing editor there, a lovely lady, came walking in, has a black look on her face, and we were doing something. We weren't supposed to be interrupted. And I said, Susan, I can't take a call. She goes, some man says, you tell him it's Coach Dooley on the phone. And I said, oh, well, I better take that, I guess, So, but he wanted to make another run at it. And that had just been the season, the 83 season. They went 9-2, snubbed for a bowl game. Mm-hmm. And he was convinced that the publicity or lack thereof for the program had played a role.
Interesting.
And he had a good buddy who, and I forget the guy's name now, but he had put together a newspaper for the University of Kentucky called The Cat's Paws. And Dooley liked that. It, I think, had a big following. And he wanted something kind of patterned after that. So went down, interviewed, talked it all through, and that got the ball rolling. And so it was a nice marriage of something that I was very interested in. And I think he saw me as somebody who could be trusted to be a true fan and yet had the ability to be objective too, So we went ahead and we set it all up, and I started in March, in late March, very late, like right at the end of March. And that gave us a chance to start getting things together. But there were stumbles right out of the gate, which I know we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm. So did you have to do the ad sales and all that stuff? Like you had to do all the heavy lifting, right?
You know what?
Colston thinks that's funny.
Well, yeah, it was. You got to keep in mind too, this is 1984. There is no transmitting of stories over the ether, Transmitting a story meant you download to a floppy disk, you put it in your car and you drive it. Which in my case, yes, I did it all except for one key thing. I got there on my first day on the job. And they said, hey, we got some good news for you. I said, what? They said, we've already set up the printing contract. I said, you have? They set up the printing contract in Galax, 75 miles away, because they got it at the best price, I guess. And so I'm like, we have a printing press in Christiansburg. We have a press in Radford. What are you? So, yes, I was doing it all, writing the stories, marketing the paper, selling the ads, designing the everything you think of. I felt like every game had to have a column and quotes and stats and the whole bit. And it was just chaos, trying to get this thing going. But we'll get to more of that coverage. But for that inaugural edition, we wanted to get one out in the spring, even though it was off season for football. just to try to get something on the street, get some interest, get some subscription revenue flowing. And we did that, of course. It came out in May. That was the inaugural edition with Bruce on the cover, of course.
Bruce Smith,
who was being touted. He was a rising senior. He'd had a fantastic junior year.
He had 22 sacks his junior year.
Unbelievable. I think he sacked the Duke quarterback 6 or 7 times in one
4.
game. Was it 4?
Was that Ben Bennett?
It was Ben Bennett.
Yeah.
Was it only 4?
It was only 4 because that's the record for sacks in a game.
Okay,
Bruce
right.
has it. J.C. Price has it. I think.
Right.
Yeah, let's not get bogged down in
That's
that.
not. Yeah. You're right. But yeah, I remember the Bennett quote. Yeah, Bruce and I got to know each other real well. I know the names of his family. He knows my. Yeah,
That's right. I
Yeah.
forgot about that.
yeah. But so Bruce was going to be pushed heavily for the Outland Trophy that year.
Okay.
Jack Williams and the SID crew were going to really go all in on that. But before we even got to that, there are a lot of little beginning points that you don't always think about. We had to have a name. We had to have a design. We had to have all that stuff. And for a name, pretty funny story and typical of dealing with Bill Dooley, who I like a lot, actually. At that time, the marketing slogan for the athletic department was "Get in the Hokie Huddle."
I
You saw
remember
those
that.
bumper stickers everywhere,
Yep.
and so I was playing around with that and trying to use the word tech, maybe like you've used it here.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, there's a bunch of techs. There's only one Hokie. Let's try to use Hokie. And I thought about so I came up with the Hokie Huddler. And I went to Jack Williams, the SID. I said, hey, Jack, what do you think of this? And he looked at it and he thought about it a minute. And he said, yeah, we wanted people to get in the Hokie Huddle. This is a tool to huddle people. I get it. I like it. Passed it around down there. Everybody liked it. I took it up to Dooley. I said, hey, coach, I want to show you something. And I set the thing up for him. I said, we're getting the Hokie Huddle is our slogan. And I laid that in front of him. And he looks at it and he goes, Hokie Huddler. Huh. That was it. He didn't say no, so that became the name.
You were all excited.
And everybody would refer to it as the Huddler.
The Huddler. Yeah.
Not Hokie. It was the
Yeah.
Huddler. Yeah.
That's right.
So I have here in the office a collection of every single issue of the Hokie Huddler ever, except for that one. I do not have that first one. That thing is scarce.
That is scarce.
So just since we're at this point in the show, so you had volume 1, volume 1, number 1,
Yeah.
and that was it.
Well,
so the following fall, you got
yes, volume
2. Let's see,
number 1.
there you go. Volume 2, number 1.
Yeah, I had so many things spinning out of control. I had to come up with a numbering. Honestly, didn't think about it too much. I wish I had just said inaugural edition and then volume 1.
Yeah.
But I wanted the year to be the school year, not the calendar year, so this was the end of the first school year. Now, if you want to see that first paper, we can show it here. Give me a minute, Nick. I have a bound copy, my own bound copy of every issue I printed, which I'm so grateful I did, and it's been on the shelf for 30 years untouched. There's Bruce on the cover, and that is the inaugural edition of the Hokie Huddler.
Very nice.
So nice interview with him, and was well received, and we got the ball rolling, with ads and subscriptions. And
How did you sell subscriptions? How'd you advertise this thing?
by printing the paper, we did a mass mailing to a large alumni mailing list. And in the paper, there's this appeal announcing this is what this is. This is a new newspaper. It's going to be very objective, but very complete. Dooley and everybody associated with it were insistent that it be an objective thing and not a rah-rah sanitized
That's
piece.
really interesting.
Isn't it, though?
Yeah.
And yet, he was still technically the publisher, And one good example of that, I had a letters to the editor section. And you know what can happen with letters to the editor. You read our message boards, you can know that.
Well, Coach Dooley's offense was not something that was going to draw a lot of praise.
No. There was there were some letters complimenting this, that, and the other thing. There were also some critical letters. At one point, the volume started increasing on these letters into negativity, And the word came down, we're not having any more letters to the editor. I just thought, oh, here we go. That next day, I had to go speak at a Hokie Club meeting over in the Tidewater area. And the guy who introduced me stood up and said, the thing I really like about the Hokie Huddler? Doug will let you print letters to the editor. Get things off your chest. I'm just sitting there smiling, and I didn't say a word, of course, but that was the end of the letters about halfway through the first year. So there was a point where objectivity was a difficult task to keep. Yeah.
I think that was later reintroduced. In this, you've said a couple things that in this environment is hard to imagine. Getting to fly on the charter plane with the team as a student journalist.
Mm-hmm.
They're very guarded these days. And part of the mandate being that it should be objective. After being burned by Bill Brill, who was not objective. To be fair, he was not objective at all.
No.
So that makes me, I don't want to say that makes me rethink what I think about Bill Dooley. I just think that's an interesting characteristic of his personality.
Yeah, my take on Dooley was that the players liked him for the most part. He was a disciplinarian, but he was popular to a degree with the players. Mm-hmm. But his public facing self to hardcore Hokie fans was not good. Partly because of his disdain for some of the culture here. When the bowl bid came along, the Independence Bowl, I'm jumping around a little bit here chronologically, but we had a big media session. It was a big deal. Finally got the bowl bid. You had the Air Force media, you had our media, you had all kinds of neutral media. And somebody said, "Coach Dooley, what is a Hokie?" And Dooley said, "I don't know, but I'm damn proud to be one." And he laughed, the biggest laugh I've ever seen him laugh. And the real hardcore Hokie people in the room were just standing there looking at him like, what is wrong with you? But because he didn't know and he didn't care to know. Now, as an aside.
I don't know. That's a good answer. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, you think that's a good answer? I don't know. If it was somebody who actually knew, I might be more sympathetic. But as an aside, it's not as bad as what Charlie Moyer said at the NCAA tournament. You remember it was Virginia Tech, Jacksonville, Arkansas, and Indiana State with Larry Bird.
Yep, 1979.
Yep. So we're at the press conference there. Here's Sidney Moncrief from Arkansas. Here's Wayne Robinson all around the room. And somebody says, "Coach Moyer, what is a Hokie?" And Charlie Moyer said, "Well, actually, a Hokie is a castrated turkey."
So that's where that came from.
Yes. Well, he may not have originated it, but that's where it got spread.
I love Coach Moyer.
So anyway.
That is a mistake. So I actually have to admit, I did not know where Coach Dooley was from. He was born in Mobile, Alabama, played for Mississippi State. I did not know that.
The trench
offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Offensive lineman, yeah.
Guard, it says. Coach, let's see, he coached at Mississippi State, Georgia, then UNC. So I can get how coming here may have a little bit of a culture shock.
Well, I remember meeting with him this very first week on campus, and he was just shaking his head at the dearth of talent on the team. You had some good players at Mickey Fitzgerald at that time, but team speed, real problem, and he was just offensive line depth and size, which is a perennial problem anyway. But he knew he had a lot to build, and it was Jack Williams' job to remind people power football is a great thing to watch when you got people up front who can run the lines, right? So,
this episode of the Tech Sideline Podcast is brought to you by Rich Web, your local provider of top-tier IT managed services. For 30 years, Rich Web has offered a comprehensive suite of cutting-edge solutions tailored to empower businesses of all sizes in today's digital age. From top-tier network engineering services, ensuring seamless connectivity and security, to our exceptional managed endpoint and cloud services, providing proactive maintenance and strategic optimization, we're dedicated to delivering excellence at every turn. Rich Web, driving enterprise IT. Visit richweb.com to learn more. Rich Web has proudly hosted TechSideline.com for over 2 decades.
So, what mistakes did you make that first year? Share some of your mistakes.
Yeah, well, other than my numbering issue there, I was running so hard. I was taking papers around to convenience stores. Here we were, newlyweds. Amanda's driving me around, and I'm jumping out of the car, going into 7-Elevens and whatnot, selling ads. We did a promotion with WROV in Roanoke, and just all kinds of things to try to promote it. And the one big promotion I had in mind was to try to get students interested. You fought that battle for years with Tech Sideline, And so I thought, all right, I'm going to print one edition and send it to give it to every student. About 3 days before that week's game, my photographer called and said, I forgot to tell you, I have a wedding I have to go to this week. I can't shoot the game. But he recommended somebody who he thought was good. And so I ended up with a photographer who was mediocre at best. And the way this worked now, remember, trying to design a page, lay out a page, it's not pointing and clicking, it's driving and pasting. For me, a game day would be go to the game, do the interviews, write the story, write the column, gather the stats, get it all on a floppy disk, give the photographer time to develop and print his photos. We would meet at a particular spot, door handle to door handle, like a drug deal, and he would hand off the photos, and then I would drive an hour and a half to Galax.
Oh, gosh.
And a paste up was literally a paste up. You cut it, you run it through a wax machine, you put it on the page, you slide it around until it's straight. I mean, heavy duty detail, Wow. So with all that work involved in getting an issue out, by the time I realized I didn't have very good photos, I couldn't turn it off, So I ended up distributing the one paper of that year. If you look through that first year, the West Virginia game coverage is the only one that has really mediocre photos and very few photos. Otherwise, we always were very photo heavy. So I guess that's not, I can't take a whole lot of the blame there because I was blindsided, but the outcome was a big letdown.
Nick, you got to remember that we need to do some post-production because I've got that issue. So we'll pull it out and take a look at it.
Yeah.
So how did you, as far as subscriptions go, what were the numbers? Do you remember?
I do. We started off with...
First of all, how much did it cost?
A whopping $20.
And that included postage and shipping?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So $20 for 33 issues.
For 33 issues. And I thought, let's start with a fairly low price point, try to get some decent numbers. We started off with about 1,500 off of that inaugural issue, had it to about 2,000 approaching the season, and then came the West Virginia loss, and subscriptions hit a stopping point. Now, on the subscription front and on that postage front, one of my big challenges was sending this thing second class, and the mail service was horrible. Oh. I went down to the Galax postmaster, and I walked into this one-room post office, and I said, hi, introduced myself, blah, blah, blah. And I said, hey, we need to send this newspaper second class from your post office. And it's this deer in the headlights moment. He'd never been confronted with that before. And that first issue of the season with the Stallions on the cover went out, and all around Blacksburg, I got good feedback about it. Didn't hear anything much from anywhere else. That's because they hadn't gotten it.
Oh, gosh.
So Friday, I'm in there working on the next edition, and I start getting all these calls and complaints from people who still hadn't gotten their paper from the previous week, Very discouraging.
I remember that being a thing because I was born and raised in Charlottesville, and I worked in Charlottesville from 87 through 94. And I remember it got to Charlottesville in timely fashion. It would get there on Wednesday or Thursday.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that was pretty good, and for again, pre-internet days. Of course, I'm living in Charlottesville. There's no coverage of Virginia Tech in Charlottesville. Down here, it was a different problem where the coverage was hostile. Up there was no coverage. So Hokies of a certain age remember that trip to the mailbox looking for the Hokie Huddler.
Well, that also made it so imperative to get it out on Monday.
Yeah.
Because of that. And
Yes.
so that's a lot of pressure because Sundays, you remember, they were 16-hour days.
Right.
After that game.
Right.
And we said, we have to get that out Monday. Yeah. So people wouldn't, because it would still get there late.
In the category of mistakes, one time I thought, well, I can at least get Amanda to come with me one time. And there's this motel in Galax that had a king size waterbed. And I thought, well, we'll make a little fun weekend out of this, in Galax. And of course I ended up working the whole night, finally got back. Turns out the power had failed at the motel. The waterbed had become an ice chunk, it was just shivering. Anyway, wow. that's the kind of.
And you didn't have a proofreader or anything.
I was the editor.
Yeah.
I was the proofreader. I was the pay stub guy. Everything. It's a very dangerous way to do it. And so with all that mayhem going on, I was still determined to try to have a certain quality of writing and that type of thing, which looking back on it, in preparing for this, and I got that off the shelf, that bound copy, and just leafed through it all real quickly. And I got to tell you, it exhausted me to see how much work was involved in that. Luckily I was in my 20s.
Yeah, that kind of thing is interesting. I've finished the basement at my house over the course of years, and I don't like to stand in that basement and think about the work. I don't like to think about that. I like to just enjoy the basement being done. So I know that heebie-jeebie feeling that you get. So you did it 1 year. Highlights of that year were Bruce winning the Outland Trophy. And then there was, Virginia Tech went 8-3, right?
8-3.
Got invited to the Independence Bowl against Air Force.
Yeah.
And then some stuff came to light. Now that's a whole separate podcast, so try to be concise. But what happened?
Bruce had just won the Outland Trophy.
16 sacks his senior year, if I remember correctly.
Thank you. Yep. And all that goodness lasted a week. We got the bowl bid, and then the news came out that there was an NCAA sanction prohibiting him from playing in a bowl game. Dooley had known about that for 2 years.
But it was not publicly known.
But it was not disclosed. And that's what got the media's attention.
Now, the reason he was barred from playing in a bowl game was there was supposedly a recruiting violation.
Yes.
Where a load of firewood was delivered to his dad by a booster or something lame like that.
Yes.
So the NCAA, I think their punishment for Virginia Tech was I don't know what it was, but it included Bruce Smith couldn't play in bowl games.
Bruce Smith and 6 other players. The other 6 had moved on or had been exonerated by then. Only Bruce was in the crosshairs still. So down in Shreveport for the bowl game, it was a zoo, just a media circus. And about every 3 or 4 hours, the story would change. He's not playing by judge's order. He is playing by a new judge's order. He's not playing. He is playing. Suits and countersuits, all of that positivity that could have been generated. Bruce, the Outland Trophy winner, became Bruce, the guy who had to sue the NCAA. And it was just a shame, But there's a whole lot more detail.
Total distraction to the team and loss.
Total distraction.
Bottom line was he did get an injunction and he did play.
He did play, and yet the offense turned it over at a couple of key times, and the game got out of hand. And the final score, I think, was like 23-7 or something like that. And I was talking to Jeff Charles the next day, and he had just come back from his morning run. He passed Jesse Penn in the parking lot. He was walking along, kicking a can, literally kicking a can. And he saw him. He said, "Hey, Jesse, what's up?" And he goes, "I can't believe we let those little white boys beat us." But that running game was sophisticated, man. It was, as you know.
Man, my Jesse Penn story is I was playing in the War Memorial Gym one time playing pickup ball. And I think I've told this story on the podcast. And a guy came in built like a Greek god. And I thought, man, if that guy isn't a professional athlete, he's a head case. And I was like, who is it? And somebody said, that's Jesse Penn. And Jesse would have had a phenomenal NFL career, but I think he had some neck issues.
Dallas Cowboys, though.
Yeah, well, I know how you feel about that. But he was just an incredible athlete.
Funny story, too, about that. My first year at the Huddler, I was like asking people, said, what really happened with that Bruce Smith thing? And Tom Fletcher, who was one of the administrators, says, well, was that a load of wood he got? They're all upset about that. He says, well, sometimes it's not the load of wood, it's the truck it comes in on.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying. And so he got the injunction and he played. And then later on, and we'll get to this during your tenure, Virginia Tech got put on probation, football and basketball. And there's a belief, I won't even call it a theory, I'll call it a belief among Virginia Tech fans that because of what Bruce and his lawyer did at the 84 Independence Bowl, when it came time to put Tech on probation in 86, 87, the NCAA let him have it.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. So there's something to that because ultimately these decisions are driven by individuals and individuals are petty and vindictive at times. Yeah. So let's see. I've got notes here. It says NCAA sanctions fiasco at the bowl game. The basketball teams collapsed over the last couple of weeks of the year. That's not really news. That's something they used to do almost every year, right?
Yeah, this year, unfortunately, there was a lot of high expectations for that team. Del Curry was a junior. You had Perry and Al Young as seniors. A lot of talent. They didn't have good size on the front line. Bobby Beecher was 6'9", I think. But just high expectations for that team, and they performed great until the last couple of weeks, and then they just fell apart. And it looked like there had been a poisoning in the locker room. Perry Young and Charlie Moyer had a falling out of some kind. I don't know why or how, but those two guys lost their ability to deal with each other. And in fact, Perry Young then in the NCAAs, and his roommate, I'm going to draw a blank on his name now, Tim. Anyway,
yeah, I can't
Wilson
remember.
maybe. At any rate, they didn't show up for the bus to go to practice, and so they got disciplined with a suspension. Didn't get to start the game. They said they didn't get the call. They claimed innocence, but there had been this growing rift. And Perry, as good as he was, and he's still giving his all in the game, and yet on the bench you could see it in his body language. In the locker room you could see it in the way he interacted, and there was just this kind of falling apart. At the same time, Al Young got hurt in the final regular season game of the year.
Gosh.
They lost to Florida State, big upset in the opening round of the Metro, and then they lost in the opening round to Temple, I think it was, in the NCAAs. It just fell flat.
Mm-hmm.
And but Dell would go on to come back the next year and be ACC Player of the Year, But they
Metro
Player of the Year. Sorry, yeah.
So to relive a bit of misery, do you remember how they lost to Florida State in the Metro Conference
I
tournament?
do.
I do remember. Go ahead.
Pee Wee Barber.
Pee Wee Barber's shot from behind midcourt, I believe, and he was from Virginia and was not recruited by Virginia Tech. And it's like, oh my God.
Well, and they also had this big guy, Alton Lee Gibson, who was famous for quitting during a game if you could just get him a little bit discouraged. And they failed to get him discouraged. I asked to sit on the bench and stay in the locker room for that game. So I followed the team into the halftime speech that Boyer gave. And the invectives were flying hard and heavy because Florida State was controlling that game and Gibson was having a great game. And Charlie Moyer says, "We even got Gibson up off the bench cheering," and he's a famous quitter. So, that was a bad
sign.
one.
Yeah, I've been friends with Phil Williams since we were about 5 years old, and I remember Phil and I were talking about that game one time. We were talking about Pee Wee Barber's shot, and Phil said, he said one of the worst things about that is nobody remembers. He said, I threw one of the best passes of my life to Del Curry right before that for a layup to put us ahead. And he said, then Pee Wee hits a shot and nobody remembers the pass.
Well, you guys remember now, you talking about basketball. Really, Tech at that time was as much a basketball school as football was.
Absolutely.
And it had a great history, and Charlie had doing some great things in that. My first year, they had Del Curry. He was a senior, and made the NCAAs and going to LSU, Baton Rouge, for the first round. And as you were talking about before, Doug, the photographer situation. So I was the photographer sitting on the sideline taking pictures. But the day before, we went to the practice rounds. And they were playing Villanova, and they were the defending national champs. And Raleigh Massimino was the coach. And we were watching their practice, and they were just goofing off and having a great time. And they literally were putting players on shoulders and running up and down.
Villanova was or Tech was?
Villanova.
Okay.
They were loose and doing these goofy games with guys on their shoulders, passing to each other. I said, man, these guys are really loose. And then I'm sitting in my hotel room, and Roy Brow comes in, and we were good friends, and he comes in and just talks. I said, hey, Roy, we're going to get them right. We're favored. We're going to win the game. He goes, man, I don't know. I said, what? He says, man, Coach Moyer's really nervous, and the guys see it. I mean, it's like, we're tight. I was like, oh, no, really? He says, yeah. He says, I hope we can overcome it. And then in the game, you saw Dell got 2 early fouls, and they crushed us.
Yeah.
And you could just see how important it was just to be loose. And they had been there before, and
that's gloomy. So, what led you to move on after 1 year? Like I would think, having given birth to this thing, you would want to see it to at least
stay around and reap the rewards, right? Well, just to finish the circulation note, we topped at about 3,000, climbing nicely. Had a hiccup with West Virginia, got a little above 3,000, and then lost to UVA in a heartbreaker. And 4 interceptions against UVA, 1 nearly returned for a touchdown, but chased down by that new guy, John Ford, that fast receiver they had. Actually, Lee intercepted it, steaming toward the end zone, ended up getting a field goal. Had all these instances where drives failed to go through a touchdown and ended up in field goals. I know we've never seen that. But at any rate, that so dispirited the fan base. The year prior had been a 48-0 shellacking in Charlottesville. And it's like, our program is finally creating some separation. And then that happened. And the rest of the season was just kind of a bleh, until the bowl game came, and then the whole Bruce fiasco, another air out of the balloon. At any rate, that had nothing to do with my departure. I think the circulation could have grown more had there been a little more momentum on the field, but was what it was. For me,
what number did you need to break even financially?
I was saying 5,000 was going to be the bare break-even minimum.
Yeah, okay.
Now, there was some projections that Jack Bogacic came up with that he was reporting from the athletic department. I don't even know if they were accurate or not. Showed a $40,000 deficit. I don't know how that math really quite comes together, but I was thinking if we could get to 5 the first year, we would have enough base to, be meaningful. So I didn't leave because I was afraid it was going to fail. I didn't leave because I was sick of it necessarily, but I just thought, I don't want to have my life consumed like this anymore. I really, going through a first year of marriage and a first year of starting a newspaper is a really poor strategic thing to do. but you do what you do sometimes. And I just thought, for the good of my physical health, my marriage, and I was thinking all this through, and then I got a call from my former boss in Winchester, and he said we would check in with each other once in a while. We were friends. And he just asked me if I'd ever consider coming back as a city editor. And I said, well, actually, I've been thinking all this through, and one thing led to another, and I went back to be the city editor of that paper again.
Yeah. Okay. I can sympathize with that a little bit because I know there was a certain point where we had, we had 2 kids born in 99, 2000, 2002. So we had 3 kids. We had 3 little kids, and I'm still running Tech Sideline by myself. And I remember working till midnight and 1 a.m. doing stuff. I remember I would read, my oldest son, Malcolm, I would be in his bedroom reading a book to him before bed. And I'd say, okay, get your mom from the other bedroom where she was reading to her other son. And in the time it took him to walk down the hall and get his mom and come back, I would fall asleep. I've been there, man.
Yeah.
When you're starting something up.
Yep.
So now we segue to the Chris Colston era. I assume Doug shared none of this with you before you took the job?
Well, you had it said. It was a really interesting situation because remember, I don't know if you remember it was a private corporation at that time. The Huddler was totally separate. I guess he just wanted to say, look, if this thing bombs out, I don't want, Dooley said, I don't want to be responsible for the financials. And you had a petty cash fund and a car.
Yeah. It was that. And it was to create more of an appearance of separation.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you're explaining all this to me, and I'm overwhelmed because I'm in there. So, getting the job, right? So remember, I had reached out to you when I read that article, and you said, well, if all things go well, I'm going to hire an assistant in the spring. And so we talked for an hour, and the similarities were amazing because I was the Newcastle Record editor, selling ads and delivering papers and all that stuff. And then just out of the blue, I'll never forget this. I had a secretary in Newcastle, and she quit that day over something I don't even remember. And I'm manning the desk. I never did that. And the phone rings. And somehow, I guess I gave you that number, and you said, this is Doug Waters. I said, oh my God. He says, well, I got news for you. I'm leaving. And I says, I've got 2 job openings. I've got my job and then the assistant job that we talked about. Which one are you interested in? And I just kind of blurted out, and I didn't think I was capable of doing it, but I said, well, I kind of like your job. He says, okay, well, let's get this going. And so we started the interview process. And I remember when we set it up, and it was you and Jack Williams, the sports information director, was in there, and you were wearing these bright green pants. I'll never forget.
Please don't tell people that.
And I had these Hokie scrapbooks of basketball, and I just did these things. And because that's how avid I was. I was like a diehard, like we talked about before. I just loved Hokie basketball. So I said, well, this will show my interest in it. I didn't have, my journalism credentials were 1 year and 7 months at a weekly newspaper with a 300 circulation.
Well, and the first time that I got to see those was the first time you and I met was Amanda and I, and you and all 3 of us went to lunch at a burger place in town, and you pull these things out, and I'm like, what kind of a person working another job keeps a scrapbook and writes articles and has all this stuff? I says, this guy is perfect.
Well, I'm that kind of person.
Yeah,
See?
you know.
And look where you are.
And so before that, we talked and you gave me a little bit of a prep and you said, this is what you should emphasize and everything. And I said, okay. And you said, by the way, I've got a 2-bedroom apartment, 3rd floor at Terrace View, $310 a month. Would you be interested?
Can we pause on that? 2-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
$310 a month. Kids, that's not per bedroom. That is total rent.
Total rent. 3rd floor too. Nobody above you stomping around.
1985 pricing.
Terrace View was one of the nicer
Terrace
apartment
View was
complexes
nice back
at the
then,
time.
right? And you said, would you be interested in subleasing that? I go, well, I'll think about it. I don't know. And so then I did the interview and they said, okay, we'll let you know something on Monday. So I'm working in the Salem Times Register main building there, so they had 4 papers out of that. And every time a phone call would come in, you would hear it over the intercom, and then they would say who the phone was for. And I'm expecting to hear from you, and that thing must have rang like 50 times that day. And I'm working on getting the Newcastle Record deadline done. And I'm sitting there, and every time I said, that's Doug. Never was you. And it's like, I go home, and I thought for sure I'm not getting this job. And I was like, I was so depressed and everything. Because this is, for me, my dream job. This was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Because I remember at one time I said, Doug, I'll just work for you $200 a week, which is like, what, $10K a year? I'll just do anything. I just want to get in there. And
well, it wasn't a whole lot more than that.
It wasn't much, yeah. And so then Tuesday you called at 10 a.m. and I was like, oh my God. He says, okay, I've got it down to 3 people and they're all pretty even. He says, let me ask you again would you be interested in subleasing my apartment? I go, yes!
Just for the record, I have no memory of that conversation.
And then you called me the next day and you said you got the job. You're going to meet with Dooley on Memorial Day. So then it was set up for 5:15 in the afternoon on Memorial Day. So I'm driving up there and I go into his office and I'm waiting. And it's almost 7 o'clock at night. And he finally shows up. He says, well, I'm sorry I'm late, but I was meeting with Dr. Lavery. I said, well, that's as good an excuse as you're going to have. And you had told me push for 17 or 18K. I remember this. And so I was getting ready. I was like, I got to negotiate with Bill Dooley because I'm a little bit intimidated. I'm just this little schmo who I never had met him before. That's the first time I'd seen him on TV and everything. And it's like, And he says, well, I can't give you much money to stop, but I can give you $19,500 and a car and you get a lot of perks to go with it. I said, done.
Where do I sign up? Yeah.
But remember the car?
Well, the car was an old, big Chevy diesel. And because he had offered me.
Was it a Chevette by any chance?
Not a Chevette.
It was a big like
a Chevette. I can't remember the
Impala, maybe? I don't know what it was.
Something like that.
Might have been an Impala.
It was just
a big
giant,
car, but a diesel. And in fact, I was coming back from Galax on Super Bowl Sunday, really trying hard to get home in time for the Super Bowl. Bitterly cold weather, and the car comes to a stop on the side of the interstate because the diesel had gummed up.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So our very first Super Bowl together, my wife had to come get me on the side of the road, and we had to let the car thaw out before it was working. That was my perk as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then remember you said you got a Watts line. Remember what a Watts line was? You can make any call across the country toll free. It's like, wow, this is amazing. Okay. You got petty cash. You can pay for this, So I was sitting in there and kind of like overwhelmed. I was like, well, I don't even know what to do first. But I did hire Mike Ashley to be my assistant. So we're sitting in there. And remember where your office was? They turned it into the academic room. It was right when you come up from Castle Coliseum. There was no windows in there.
No.
And Jeff Charles was next door.
Right next door, yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were sitting in there and like just to kill time, I bought one of those Larry Bird indoor Nerf hoops. And so Mike and I would play and Jeff Charles would come in and do play-by-play. And then he would get involved and we'd throw him alley-oops. And remember Manute Bowl was a 7'7" center for the Cal, and he would take the ball and drop it and go, Manute. So that's what was going on at the time, right? So anyway, so we were trying to sell ads and I came up with an idea for on the back page, the restaurant guide.
Yeah, that was my idea.
Oh, that was your idea. Okay,
it was already there.
Okay, it was already there. So we were trying to sell these things.
We're going to get a lot of these, aren't we? Will, we're going to have some of these. No, that was your idea. That was my idea.
Well, it was a good idea.
That was actually.
You know what it was? I think I saw you doing that, and then that's what I was doing when I was at the Salem Times Register. We started doing that.
Aha! You copied my idea.
I copied you. So anyway, we're going around and trying to sell these ads, and there was this place a barbecue place called Dem Bones out in on Price's Fork. I don't know if you remember Dim
Bones.
But anyway, we'd go in there and the guy was really, I don't know, it says it's $25. Come on. And so, so he was a little bit shaky. And then I remember when my first game, we went to Cincinnati and lost. And Mike and I are sitting there and go, well, there goes the Dim Bones ad. And the Crickets guy would try to fit like a novel into every little box, like it was a little square. And we were just, so we're doing the best we can. And then, so it's September, late September, and the Roanoke Times comes out with this major multi-part series on the financial situation of Virginia Tech and how bad it was and how mismanaged
Dooley had put the athletic department into what was a lot lot of debt at the time.
$1
million.
It was so Bogacik Jack Bogacik was a terrific reporter for the Roanoke Times.
Good guy.
Really good investigative guy. And so, you were having him doing this investigation and then you had Brill writing these columns, which were just very
dismissive,
slanted.
Yeah.
And that's what Dooley told me when I interviewed with him. He says, I want something that's objective here and to raise interest in Virginia Tech football. But it was all because to fight the Roanoke Times and Bill Brill. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And so, as bad as it was, it's the reason we got these jobs. So anyway, this thing comes out and I'm looking in the article and, they had talked to me about it, but I didn't think it was going to be slanted this way. And there's a picture of me like a deer in headlights. And they're saying if the Hokie Huddler does not break even this year, it will be shut down. And I'm like, what?
Nobody told me.
So I went down to the business. Don Perry was the business manager. I said, Don, is this correct? Is this true? He says, yeah, pretty much. I go, oh, shit. All right, well, we better start selling some more ads, And sure enough, we lost $31,000 that first year, which I guess was a little bit of improvement, but still.
But what percentage of that? Like, what was total revenue? What was total expenses?
Oh God,
Can you ballpark?
I don't. It was. Do you recall what that was? I don't have any idea.
Well, 5,000 would have been $100,000 in subscription revenue. So 3,000, that's about 60, right?
Wow.
And then you started raising rates right away.
Yeah, we tried to. It helped a little bit.
Yeah.
And then, that
didn't include the ad revenue, which was not great. But
so 31K is a pretty big percentage.
Yeah, we were struggling, and that first season wasn't that good. We didn't go to a bowl game, and Mike, in that room, that office didn't have any windows, and Mike would say, "Well, if they cut the lights off on us, no one's going to find us in here."
So wait, I got to jump in here because as typical of me, I've gotten involved in the conversation and forgotten to do the sponsor promos.
Yeah, you go.
So today's episode is brought to you in part by Christine Shepard of Joyner Fine Properties in Richmond, Virginia. If you are buying or selling a home in Richmond, Christine is who you need to contact, and here's a word about her.
In real estate, it's not just about buying or selling. It's about finding a place that truly feels like home. That's what drives Richmond-based agent Christine Shepard with Joyner Fine Properties. With more than 30 years of experience, Christine brings a calm, thoughtful, and highly personalized approach, along with a designer's eye that helps buyers see potential and sellers showcase their homes beautifully. A proud fourth-generation Virginia Tech Hokie, Christine leads with a deep sense of community and loyalty, helping clients not just find a house, but truly find where they belong. If you're considering your next move, trust Christine Shepard for a real estate experience rooted in expertise, design, and genuine Hokie heart.
Many thanks to Christine for sponsoring Tech Sideline, and to let y'all know, she has signed up for another year, so that's completely awesome because she's completely awesome. Hit her up if you are doing real estate dealings in Richmond. So, Chris, back to your tales of your first year. You said the football team did not make a bowl game. I remember that. They started out poorly. But Tech had a good basketball team that year. That was 85, 86?
Yeah, that's when we that was the Del Curry's last year in Baton Rouge, the story I shared earlier. And so, and I always said this when I left after my 11-year run there, my fondest memories were basketball, being in Castle on press row with sellouts. That place would rock. It was magical. Yeah. And it'd be great, to recapture that at some point. But that was my lasting memory, not football. That first year, and then we lost $31K, and so we had to let Mike go.
Oh, okay.
But he landed on his feet. He got into the sports information department at Virginia Tech, which led to him getting at sports information department at Radford. And he did so well there. He's in the Radford Sports Hall of Fame now.
Yeah.
So
he's a Radford grad, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh. So it was like a dream job for him too. So it worked out really well. But so then, the next year, the Peach Bowl and everything. So that helped a lot. But then Dooley, as we all know, they because of everything that was going on, the administration fired him basically, but let him stay on as coach.
Yeah.
Which how many times has that ever happened?
So let me do a little plug here. I actually wrote about that. It's been over 20 years ago. I wrote a series of articles called "The Year of Our Discontent," which was about that year, and it's a very complicated story, too complicated to tell here. But Virginia Tech had violations in both the football and men's basketball programs, and it wound up taking down Bill Lavery, the president of the university. Yeah. I graduated in 1987, and I think I don't remember who the governor was. Was it Belial's? His graduation speech, he blistered Virginia Tech. So it was a rough year.
Yeah.
And that was your second year on the job.
Yeah.
How did you report on all that stuff?
So, well, it was delicate, obviously. What was more delicate was the whole Dutch Bachman thing, which happened later. But, so we got that news, I think, when we were going to Syracuse, that Dooley would not be retained.
Do you remember what game of the year that was? It's like maybe it was early.
We just won at Clemson. So it might have been
second game of the year.
That was the second game. So this must have been Syracuse was the third
game, right?
And we went up there and won in the Carry Dome, which was a rarity. But that, I tell you, you talked about the players loving Dooley. They did. I mean, because that was a rallying point for them. And it actually, you would think, lame duck coach, that would be a detriment. It actually worked to their advantage, because we would go up there and talk to them in those press conferences, and they would just say, they were very anti-administration and pro-Dooley, and that we want to win it for him. And they went on that great run.
Yeah.
And it was and won the Peach Bowl in dramatic fashion. And
that team knew how to win.
They did, yeah. And so they really loved Coach Dooley, so that when he left, Coach Beamer comes in, and he was facing scholarship limits and coming in on the heels of the first bowl win ever in dramatic fashion. And it was a really tough situation for him, right? And everybody still kind of liked Coach Dooley and struggled through a 2-9 season. And near the end of that year, we're trying to find positive things to write about. So we're doing player features. And there was this one player, Sean Donnelly, a fullback, who was a really good player, but he was a little bit crazy. He was crazy. He was like a wild man, and he had a personality. And John Hunt he was a CT sports editor, but he was also working for me freelance, and super talented writer. Ended up being inducted into the Baseball Fantasy Hall of Fame. Worked for the Portland Oregonian, and really good writer. But we were both reading a lot of Dan Jenkins novels at the time. I don't know if you've ever read any of his stuff.
I'm wondering where this story's going.
So I've told you this before. So it's very risque about players just crazy drinking, and Sean was like that. And so, using the extremely poor judgment of a young journalist, we decided to take a picture of Sean to capture his personality, right? Well, what are we talking about? Well, what really captures his personality? Oh, I know. Here's a good idea. He's got this coonskin cap. We'll put a coonskin cap on him. We'll have him holding the football in front of the beer cooler at Wade's supermarket. So we did. Okay. All right. So we did that. And then John did the interview, and we're at the News Messenger now. We moved out of Galax.
Congratulations.
So we're up there at the News Messenger on Christiansburg. Horrible place. Smelled of printing chemicals and secondhand smoke, and there was no ventilation. It was an awful place to work.
But it was 5 miles away.
But it was close.
Yeah.
And so we got in there about 10 o'clock in the morning because, we had to get the paper out first thing. So we're in there, and Doug was describing this before, where you go into the ATEX machine, the black screen with the green or the white letters, and you're typing your story, and it's on a floppy disk. And then you take that and you put it into another machine, and it prints it out on these sheets. And then you wax it, and you have to cut it, and you physically put it down. And then if you had to make a correction, you had to make the correction, the one sentence, go through that process again, cut it out, and paste that little line of correction in. I mean, it was awful. So anyway, John's working on everything's done with the paper, and I'm waiting on John to finish this Sean Donnelly feature. And it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, John, I need the story. Oh, almost done. Okay. 1:30, John, I need the story. I'm still working on it. 2 o'clock now. come on, I really need this story. Finally, around 2:30, he gets it to me, and I'm reading, and it's 3:00, and I'm like, I don't know about this. He's talking about him smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and all these crazy locker room shenanigans. I'm like, well, you know what? I've been here since 10 in the morning, 15 hours straight. Let's just go with it. It captures him. It's well written. So we go with it. 6:00 in the evening the next day, Monday. So I distribute, you know how we would distribute the papers and all the boxes and everything, and I delivered it to the mail room. Jack Williams comes up to me and he says, I can't believe you did this. I can't believe you did this. He says, what, Jack, what? We're going to get fired. We're all going to get fired. I said, what? He says, Coach Beamer, he's really mad. That Sean Donnelly story. It's terrible. It's terrible. We're going to lose our jobs. I said, oh my God. And I read it and I go, oh, this is bad. He says, this can't go out. This can't go out. So the next morning I go over to the mailroom over there on the upper quad and the military quad. And I wait for him to open the door. And I think we had printed like 10,000 because we were taking them out to the dorms to help sell ads. And we'd given them to students. We put them in all the dormitories. And I took every one of them and threw them in the dumpster.
10,000 copies.
And then I said, well, we got to get this thing out quick. I mean, we don't have time to do a whole new story. What are we going to do? Well, in the game program, they had a feature on Greg Drew, who's a defensive lineman. I said, we'll just use this. One of the kids that wrote that, we'll just put that in there. Well, do we have any Greg Drew action pictures? No. Well, okay, we'll just get his headshot from the media guide. No. So if you go back and you see that article, there's this giant picture of headshot of Greg Drew smiling in this story. And I talked to Sean later and he told me, he says, Coach Beamer, Billy Height was livid. He was the running backs coach. Right. And he took him, so you got to go talk to Coach Beamer. And he goes, oh yeah, you're in deep doo-doo. He says, all right. And Coach Beamer says, Sean, I see this article was written about you in the Hokie Huddler. It says you smoke cigarettes. Is that true? He goes, no, sir. That was my roommate. They were just sitting on the table and he assumed that. And it says here that you're drinking beer during the season. Is that true? He says, oh, no, sir. I would never touch alcohol. He says, you know what? I believe you. I said, I think this paper's done a disservice to you and it's not going to go out. So, but the problem was it was so volatile there because everybody loved Dooley, and that was an indication of what was going on with the team. Yeah. And it took him really until 93 to get that fully straightened out. So, but I mean, if that thing had gone out, Coach Beamer may not have ever been the coach at Virginia Tech.
So what did the man have 2-9, 3-8?
Yeah.
Basketball wasn't good either.
It was brutal. And then.
So what did that do to subscriptions?
I don't know how, we were just hanging on by it.
Because I still subscribed.
But, yeah. I mean, I just tried to be as objective as possible and keep it afloat and did the best we could. You know, you created that insider section. And so that was something that because we had this huge advantage of being embedded in the athletic department. So we were right there. They moved us from that office where you were over right down the hall from the sports information department. And so players would just come in, like Shane Beamer, all the specialists would just come in and plop down in the office, like if they were waiting to be interviewed or something. And they just tell us what's going on with the team. And we couldn't print a lot of that stuff. But it gave us a real feel for it, right? And we could, be careful about the way we approach things. But I think basically that's how we survived it. And before Dooley left, he thought it served a positive purpose. And so at least it was a way for us with Brill out there to keep the Virginia Tech message out there with somewhat of a positive spin. So I think that's why they were willing to take a loss on it. Yeah. But we eventually started making money. But it was tough. And I remember the 2-8-1 season, things looked really bad for Coach. And we were at the Red Lion Inn. Do you guys remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was some sort of social event. And this is how accessible Coach Beamer was. We were sitting in there. It was Jeff Motley, who's now runs the Las Vegas Speedway or something. But anyway, he was at the CT, and there was somebody else there. I can't recall who it was. But we were talking to Coach Beamer and having a few cocktails with him. And we said, Coach, look, you are not the problem. He says, but your staff is killing you. And he was like, he didn't respond to it. But I would walk down the hallways and in the defensive meeting rooms, they would be in there breaking down film. And I'm not going to say who the coach was, but he'd be sitting there with his feet propped up on the table reading a newspaper. And it's like,
Really?
that's why Ron Zook left. Remember Ron Zook left after the first year? He's a great coach. He saw that staff. He said, this isn't going to get the job done. But he finally decided, okay, look, I've got to make some moves, but he didn't want to do it. And Billy Hite told me this later. He says, Coach, you got to make some moves. You got to make some changes here. He says, yeah, I know, but they're my friends, you know. And that's part of what made Coach Beamer great. He's just a loyal person. And Billy finally says, do you want me to go do it? I'll go tell him. He said, no, I got to do it. And they brought in Phil Elmasian and some other coaches, and then that changed everything, right? And then from then on, Beamer ball was set.
So so you went from they're going to have to shut that thing down to continuing to run at a loss for years.
For a few years.
Who'd you have to convince of that? Dave Brain? I mean, you spoke about Dutch Bachman. Dutch did.
They really liked it. I worked really closely with Randy Budd in the financial department.
Yeah.
You know, and he worked with Jeff Bourne, who turned out to be an incredible athletic director for JMU.
Yeah.
But Randy and I, we just kind of worked together and said, okay, well, if we do this and we do this and you guys reach this, then you're going to be okay. So, I mean, it was just hard. Doug, you know this. I mean, it was literally 7 days a week during season, 65-hour day weeks. And
more than that.
maybe sometimes it was.
Yeah.
And it was just brutal because, you would get, especially those road games, you'd get back late, especially if it was a night game.
Well, even a night game at home was so difficult, between waiting for the photos to come and have that handoff. And of course, when I was doing it, an hour and a half drive afterward, I'd end up starting work on the layout at, midnight, 1 a.m.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not trying to get anybody to feel sorry for me or anything. This is the life I chose, but it just was not set up for success, or sustainability.
Yeah.
How long did you have to work in Galax before you got it moved?
That was, I think, pretty much 1 year, and then we got it. I just told them we can't keep doing this.
Lucky.
Yeah. And we would migrate. It was funny. It was just so brutal, and just to take breaks, that it was that big newsroom in there. And so we would get the toilet paper from from the bathroom, and we'd on those rolling chairs, and we would just throw it. And I would push, and Mike had a great arm, by the way. And I was like, catch it, just to kill time because the hours were so long and brutal. I remember one time I had to go in there and wait for a basketball game on a Monday night. I had to get the score in, and I had to drive, and it was like 15 below, and the roads were all frozen. And I got in my car and drove all the way down to Galax just to get that one stinking story in. I don't know why, but
wow. So you saw, I referenced this earlier, the time you were there, you saw some phenomenal changes. The first of which was, I believe it was December 1990 when they announced Virginia Tech was going into the Big East Conference for football.
Yeah. That was exciting times. I would fly on the little plane with Coach Beamer going up to New Jersey in the Meadowlands and the players there, and we'd go talk about that, and Mike Tranghese. It was really exciting times, and that really helped. And I think that's when we finally were breaking even and people saw hope.
Yeah.
And then 93 for sure.
So Nick, throw the camera on me for a second. This is December 21st, 1990. Virginia Tech gets invited into the Big East, and what drew my attention was that at that same time, Frank Beamer turned down Boston College.
Yeah.
The headline says Beamer turns down big bucks to stay in Blacksburg. Boston College offered him $160,000 a year to come up there and coach, and he was making $103,000 a year at Virginia Tech in 1990. Just wanted to share that for a little perspective. So you say that kind of is when it started turning the corner for you guys.
Oh yeah. Then we were in pretty good shape. They still would never give me a full-time assistant, but I got student interns because we were right down from the sports information department. We had some really good interns there.
What can you share about the entry into the Big East that hasn't already been covered? Like I interviewed Dave Brain years ago.
Yeah.
Did you know that was coming? I mean,
yeah, there was talk about it, and you got a feel for it, but just because being in the athletic department at that time, it was really great. Like we could go down. The football office was right below us, and so we could just roam anytime we wanted to. And like you'd have to set up an interview ahead of time with one of the coaches. But I had one assistant, Tim Harvey, who so you had a bunch of keys in the desk. And when we moved over to the other room, I really didn't know what they were all to. One of them was to the men's basketball locker room. But Tim would just go around and unlock doors and see where he could go. And he would pop in there, and they would, in that one big conference room that they had on the second floor, they had all the recruits in order of like their order of preference and who they were targeting. And Tim would write it down. Hey, we're looking at this guy, we're looking at this guy, we're looking at this guy.
The war room.
Yeah, and we couldn't obviously print that, although we talked about this once before. My first or second year, Frankie Allen, remember how great Frankie was? He was Charlie's assistant, and he would talk and tell you stories. And he told me everybody that we were recruiting, and I printed it.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about that one time. I got this collection of Hokie Huddlers, and I looked at it, and there's all this official visit information. This is unsigned, all this commitment news. And I asked you one time, I said, wasn't that against the rules? And you just went,
yeah, we didn't know. They told us. They finally said you can't do that anymore.
After about a couple of years, they're like, you got to stop doing that.
And then the depth chart we would do. We would literally have, like, we would print the depth chart. That's top secret information now, right? You can't even get that. And we would have the number of plays that each player would have and their injury. He has a lower calf injury here, and that would all be in the depth chart. And Bud Foster would give it to us, right? And Shelly Sidespring Bud would give us the plays, and Shelly would give us the depth chart. And that was just out there for the world to see. But that's the way it was back then.
Yeah, the Hokie Huddler printed snap counts for years.
Yeah, special teams and winner's circle and all that stuff.
I was really disappointed when that information disappeared.
Yeah.
Which probably happened under the Jim Weaver regime. So there was that. And then after years of not being great in football, they finally go to the Independence Bowl and they win the Independence Bowl. And I think it was the following spring that the vote to get into the Big East for all sports happened, and Virginia Tech didn't make it in. So kind of talk about that era some.
Well, I remember the first thing that I remember is being super disappointed that it wasn't for basketball. I mean, football was good enough, but I mean, it's like, well, what is the politics there? And we never could get a straight answer on it.
Yeah.
So, but that is really when, when you could win a conference championship, that was a huge thing in Coach Beamer being able to take the program to the next level. So, I mean, that's just what I remember. It was a game changer. It was one of those big high water marks in the program. That and obviously the ACC,
consistent scheduling, building rivalries.
And it was a great football conference. It was the rivalries for the West Virginia and Pitt and everything. I mean, it was amazing.
The Big East as we knew it was only around for, like, round robin play didn't start till 1993, and then in 2003, that was the last year Virginia Tech and Miami were in it. It was only 10 years. And the rivalries were really taking hold, and it was an underrated football conference.
Yeah, and they would have that press conference up there in the Meadowlands. I remember Warren Sapp was there, and the big thing, I guess we were asking, since we were new to the conference, what do you think a Hokie is? And he said, it's a chicken hawk. Said, why do you think it's a chicken hawk? He says, well, you tend to associate the mascot with the team name, because he would see that bird. He thought that was a chicken hawk.
So let's see. The membership in the Atlantic 10 is what happened to Virginia Tech.
Oh, God.
Were you a big baseball fan like that? That did not do the baseball program any favors to be in the Atlantic. It didn't do Virginia Tech athletics overall.
No. And what was interesting, I guess you might remember this, is English Field was right next to Jamerson Athletic Center.
It's where the football practice field is now.
And Dave Smith, long-term sports information director, had an office there, and there was a player named Trey McCoy.
Yep.
His name was Homer McCoy, and he was a power hitter. And he actually hit a ball and broke Dave's window. The ball came in through his window. And we actually ran a picture in the other with the taped up window there. But yeah, I mean, there was no stands. People would sit on the hill there.
On the hill.
The fools on the hill. And just shows you how different things were back then. But yeah, baseball was, I mean, Chuck Hartman was there for years. You remember Chuck?
Oh, yeah.
So
I remember there was one year where Virginia Tech won 50 games in baseball and did not go to the NCAA tournament.
Always getting snubbed. I remember one year we got snubbed by the NCAA. It was when we were in Biloxi for the Metro tournament, and I said, "Well, we didn't get a NCAA bid. Well, surely we're going to get an NIT bid."
Talking about basketball.
Basketball, right? Yeah. I said, "No NIT bid." I said, "What the heck is going?" So that's when I knew. I mean, we were just the national reputation just wasn't there yet.
I remember that Virginia Tech was 25-10 in men's basketball, a shoe-in to get to the NIT, and they did not get invited.
That might have been the year I was thinking about. Yeah,
and Bill Roth wrote a scathing article that ran in the Hokie Huddler.
Yeah,
he just roasted individuals by name.
The '92 season was so funny because Bill would write columns in the Huddler, and his picture that ran in his column was him smiling in the press box, and behind it you could see the East stands, and it was like sparse, like maybe a fifth full. Yeah. Hey, look, welcome to empty Lane Stadium. But it's the way it was back then.
So let me ask both of you guys, Doug. Let's you've been silent for a while, so let's get you involved again. Some of your favorite players and coaches from the year that you covered Virginia Tech.
Well, starting with basketball, Dell Curry was such a gentleman, just such a quality guy, and I got to interview him multiple times, and that was a tough year for him because he went through a rare shooting slump that year. I don't know if you remember that or not, but there was a stretch during the season where he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, and he'd be the first to tell you that. And he was walking out after one game, and he just was shaking, and it was just, every great shooter goes through a slump at some point. Well, that was his. But I always enjoyed interviewing him. He's quiet, didn't talk about himself a lot, but it's just a real pleasure and a privilege, honestly, to get to know him some. And on the football side, I did get to know Bruce Smith reasonably well. Started out the very first week I was there talking to him, and continued to do that throughout the year. And from the standpoint of watching some guy play and then being able to interact with him, he'd be at the top of my list, of course. And Ashley Lee, I mean, that whole group on defense was just a lot of fun. So, if I had another few years to get into some of the guys who followed, I'm sure I would have lasered on some of the guys you ended up with. But that one year we had some good names, some big characters, a lot of fun. A lot of fun to get to know them.
Well, and you got to know them, Will, because back then, how it is, I guess how it is now is they'll bring players out to a little interview room, right? Is that how it works? And you can't go in the locker room.
Yeah.
We would just
walk
right in. You just go
in.
right in the locker room.
Yeah. I mean, to the point that you walking in the locker room as the guys are walking out of the shower and coaches showering with the players. I mean, it's just like, really? You can't even hardly believe that happened back then.
Oh,
Yeah.
And they would just talk to you because you knew them because you were embedded. So they would talk to you, and you'd have your go-to guys. Like I would always go to Carter Wiley, and
Carter's a talker, man. I've talked to him before.
Yeah, and like every other word is expletive. But it was but he was so great. He would just tell you exactly the way it was.
Now, I'll tell you, in my prior life at the CT, the guy I always enjoyed talking to was Wayne Robinson because
articulate.
You could hardly get a question out, and it just like he had prepared comments ready to go, and he was always fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a perception at the time that I don't know, Charlie's program wasn't all that great academically, and I don't think that's true. I've met Wayne Robinson, very sharp guy, and to your comments about Dell, what was Al Young like?
Al was really humble, really quiet guy. He was such a dynamo on the court, and he had a tough end to his career with that knee injury he suffered at Cincinnati. Just getting to that game was a real problem. It was icy, it was snowy, commercial flights were shut down. We ended up taking 7 or 8 different alumni and brought their private planes in, and we flew. I remember we're flying along, and here's this guy, very old gentleman with a plane, wiping the windshield with his hand because it was frosting up, taking off. We get up in the air. Jack Williams leans up to me, and he goes, "You know something? We're a heartbeat away from death. If that guy has a heart attack, we're all dead." But that's how we finally got there to Cincinnati. And that was the game where Al Young injured his knee pretty badly. He still played in the Metro tournament, but then he had to shut it down. And I remember him sitting there at halftime of that Florida State game in agony when he finally had to just admit that he couldn't play anymore without some surgery. And after the game, Moyer and one of the other coaches were just on either side of him, and he's sitting there, his eyes are kind of big, and they said, well, what do you want to do? You want to go ahead and get surgery? What do you want to do? And it's just all on his shoulders, but he was just a really humble dude, as fast, he's like a fullback on the court, but really a pleasure to know.
Now, was that the last year of his career that you're describing? Or
That was his senior season.
Yeah. You remember he later got drafted by the NFL New York Giants. I think they drafted him in the 12th round or something like that.
He was a born running back. Yeah.
What were some of the most impressive opponents you ever saw, football or basketball? Now you did it for like 11 years.
Yeah. We still joke. Those Louisville and Memphis State basketball teams were incredible.
They were insane.
We had this running joke. William Bedford, do you remember him? He's a big center.
Yeah.
Did he play with Keith Lee? I can't remember if he did or not. But anyway, he was this big guy. And Memphis came in, and we had a lot of great upsets over them over the years. But this was a year where we did not upset them. And he must have had about 8 dunks in that game. And he would just hang on the rim, and they wouldn't call it, I guess, because somebody was under his feet. So we had the running joke that hey, I was in Castle shooting shots the other day. William Bedford was still hanging on the rim. But, oh, my God, yeah, it was
the internet says that they played together for 1 year, Keith Lee and William Bedford in 84, 85.
And that was unfortunately Keith Colbert drew the assignment of guarding Keith Lee
and did a great job that one year.
He did a great job in the second game. In the first game, they told him to post up behind him and keep his arms up.
Yeah.
And after the game, Colbert was saying, I'm just standing with my arms up like a dummy because Keith Lee went berserk, and finally in the second game in Memphis, they doubled Lee, and that was a lot more effective. Still lost the game, unfortunately, but and that's the game where Charlie Moyer really teed off on the officiating. Referred to Gene Barth, the official, as Gene Barf afterward.
Charlie was great.
Coach was good. So Chris, what led you to depart after 11 years?
Well,
because at the time you left spring of 1996.
Yes.
I mean, Virginia Tech had won the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, we had it rolling. It was pretty good. I'd been there. I think the year before, I was sitting in the Huddler office reading USA Today, thinking to myself, what does this job prepare me for? What am I going to be doing in 10 years? And I had no idea. I said, covering Virginia Tech, what is this going to lead to? Am I going to go into sports information or whatever? I had no idea. And then John Hunt, who infamous with the Sean Donnelly story, had gone on to USA Today, and he was working for Baseball Weekly. And he was leaving to take a job at the Oregonian, and he calls me out of the blue and says, hey, look, are you interested in this job? And at that time, I was going through some personal relationships that weren't working out. And I was, 38, and I was ready to settle down and have a family. And, there weren't a lot of people in their late 30s. There's no social life in Blacksburg. So I said, this may be time to go.
It's time to go.
And so I did, and Jack Williams never thought I would leave. He thought I'd be a lifer. And Dave Brain came in, and he goes, well, I'll give you a raise to stay, which was nice of him and everything. But I says, no, I've really got to take this opportunity. So, and it was just as a copy editor. It wasn't even as a writer. But it was a door, open door, get in there and then see what happens. And then it worked out. I started writing. I guess I started there, in 96 and did that and started writing about 2 years after that.
Yeah, the joke between us is I left to stay married, you left to get married.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I met my wife 2 years later.
There you go.
Yeah.
And you, until the very end, you had free reign, basically, within reason of what you wanted to write and what you wanted to do. Very
much so. Like after the Sean Donnelly thing, Jack would read. He would say, give me the pages to read over first. But then, we had an understanding. And it was great. And I had an incredible relationship with Coach Beamer, because I ended up writing his first autobiography with him. Because, he trusted. And we would sit there and talk. And I never forget that 95 season when they had that great run. We lost the first 2 games of that year. And I remember the Cincinnati game, it was a muddy mess. And I had interviewed him, and the interview was over, and he just sat there. And it's like, normally it's like, okay, no, I'm moving on. But I could tell he wanted to talk. And I said, what's on your mind? And he just said, it was really bothering him, that Cincinnati loss. And he says, I saw they had all these big fat linemen, and I saw that muddy field, and I saw we weren't going to be able to push them around in that. I just had a bad feeling from the get-go. And but then, then they beat Miami the next week without two of their starting defensive backs. And Ray Lewis was on that team. He had 15 tackles. But they had been stomping Tech the years before, and that was the breakthrough. And then they just boom.
Were you surprised by that win over Miami? Because I was not completely surprised.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was. I didn't.
Well, UCLA ran for 300 yards on them.
In
the first week of the season.
Yeah,
so
remember in the CT they had that big article. Lost Virginia Tech defense, a reward if found, or something like that.
So clever.
So, but yeah, they stepped it up. J.C. Price was great.
Was there, you're talking, it was early 1996. Was there any discussion of what the internet was going to do? What was your thinking at that point in time?
Well, it was a big deal when we got the Mac in the office. Because, you could finally write because you would have to go write. You couldn't write in the you'd maybe type something on a typewriter and then have to, but there was no mechanism in the Hokie Huddler.
Well,
office.
we had the floppy disk. I mean, we had a. we had
that's right.
Much.
There was that what was that? An ATEX machine or something like that.
You got me.
Something like that.
I just know I had to drive the floppy to Gay Labs.
Yeah, and then get the pictures. Yeah, but we finally
if
got.
You remember one thing from this podcast? It's that Doug had to drive the floppy to Gay Labs.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And but yeah, when we got the Mac, that was a big deal. But yeah, I mean. We didn't even have cell phones then, really. I mean, it was about a year or two away. So, I mean, when you started this thing right after I left.
Right about the time you left, I started in March of '96, and I remember writing an article that you were leaving. Matter of fact, keep talking. I'll look it up.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely made it a lot easier. And the other thing too is. I wish I had done this years before. So we had to put the paper out on the Monday during football season. But in basketball season, there was no compelling reason to do that. And so for years, I would go to that same grueling schedule. And finally, I got smart the last couple of years and said, well, we're going to start printing on Wednesday. That way I can have a weekend. And so that made life a little bit easier. But yeah, you were still, it was funny because you talk about alignment. Now that's the buzzword with the new regime here at Virginia Tech. And there really wasn't, quite honestly, there was not alignment at Virginia Tech even then. Because you had, and especially, at the time when Coach Beamer came in, because the administration was so upset at the way Dooley had been running things that they were they cranked up the academic standards. They said, we've had enough of this. The athletics is making us look bad. So they really made it tough on Coach Beamer, man. I'm telling you what.
Yeah, what I remember about the sanctions, the football part of it was he had taken football players and put them on track scholarships, and the NCAA found out about that, and he had put the athletic department into what was a lot of debt at that point in time.
Yeah,
and he was spending money on things like the Jamerson Athletic Center, which doesn't produce any revenue. Jim Weaver's thing was, I'll put money into facilities, but it's got to produce revenue. So I've always felt that experience, that late 80s experience of getting put on probation has shaped a lot of Virginia Tech athletic viewpoints and philosophy for literally decades.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And just I struggle with how to phrase this. There were just a lot of people in the academic side of the house, the university side of the house, who lived up until recently, who lived through that and were still in positions of power at Virginia Tech, and you could tell that they were very sensitive about that stuff. And it lingered for, again, literally decades. But I finally feel like there's alignment now.
Hopefully soon they can tap into the Northern Virginia, all the businesses up there too, because I think sometimes that's up in Northern Virginia, but I see it on a daily basis living up there, that there's a lot of potential with corporations there to support Virginia Tech.
So what are we leaving on the table, guys? We've been talking about for a while. Are there any stories you want to get out before we close this thing down?
Was there anything
Chris is flipping
else?
through his notebook.
stories that are fit for public consumption and stories that are not. Or there's a dividing
Stories we
line
don't
there.
have to bleep out.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's most of them.
Well, here's my one favorite moment in basketball is when we drove to West Virginia for an away game, and I was in Jack Williams' car with a couple other people. There were 4 of us, and Jack asked each of us, "Do you smoke?" "No." "Yo, no." He says, "Well, I do, and I'm driving." So we all came back smelling like smoke. That's not my favorite part, but those guys went up there, upset the Mountaineers because they had a good team that year, and this was right before the Christmas break. And as Keith Colbert's running off the floor, he looks up to the student section of West Virginia. He goes, "Merry Christmas!" That was one of my favorite enduring memories of that team.
Well, Jack Williams was such a legend, and I love him dearly. And I owe so much to you, Doug, and I've told you this because that job changed my life. I mean, I don't know what I would have done working at a little tiny weekly newspaper if that hadn't happened. And Jack was really good to me and mentored me too. But he was a true character. And I remember that first year, Florida Field. So we had lost to the Gators and Galen Hall, and we were overmatched, but Dooley was upset about it. He had hoped we could go down there and pull the upset. And so he was ready to get those buses going, like, let's get out of here. So Jack said, "Come on, we've got to get Jeff Charles and Mike Burnup out of that press box. I mean, they're doing the post-game show. We need to go. They got to cut that short." So we got up there and tell them, I said, "Come on, you got to wrap this up." So we said, okay. And Jeff had this big old battered briefcase. And back then, they would have to use a literal telephone to make the line, the broadcast line. I don't know why or how, but it was a real telephone that they would hook up. So he put that thing in his briefcase, and we're sprinting across Florida Field, and it's Jack Williams, myself, Mike Burnup, and Jeff. And that little briefcase lock springs up, boing, and the phone falls out. And that little ringer, you know how those things, it hit the ground and went ding, ding, ding. And Mike Burnup reaches down and picks it up and puts it to his ear, and he says, "Hello?" He says, "Jack, it's for you." And Jack goes, "Hello, hello." And he said, "Mike Burnup, you're..." He called him some words we can't say on the podcast. But it's just, it was that guy. Burnup was just trying to keep things light, and we sprinted down. We made the bus.
All right, guys. Appreciate your time.
All right.
That has been, I don't know what number of the podcast this is. 40. Say that again? 489.
Wow.
Episode
489.
489.
All
Tech
right.
Sideline Podcast. Also brought to you by Christine Shepard, Richmond Real Estate, and Rich Webb. And guys, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you,
a lot of
Keith, for
fun.
the good work. We love you.
Appreciate it, man. And that does it for this episode, and we'll see you again soon.